So here we are doing a rationalization of the denominator here. The biggest component of this question, and you'll see it about once a test, is being able to look at this here and think, well, how can I make that simpler? Because I'm looking at all of our answer choices, there's no I in the denominator. So that tells us that, you know what, we may want to get rid of that. And it's always coming in the form of a binomial. Sometimes it's I, and they'll tell you this what I is. And in this case, maybe it's also, in this case it's I, but in other cases it could simply be X. And the way you solve for it honestly is about the same. And that is multiplying both the numerator, the denominator and the numerator by the conjugate pair of this, which is simply said it's the same thing, but you just flip the sign between the first term and the second. So let's tell us what that looks like here. 3 minus 5i, and then that's over 8 plus 2i. And now I want to multiply by 8 minus 2i, because after I'm done foiling these two binomials, you always end up eliminating that second term. And that's really what you want, whether it's x or in this case I. And then you multiply the top by the same, so that way we're still multiplying by just 1. And once we're done foiling these different binomials, it's quite a bit of calculating, but then we're at a point where we can simplify it to look like one of the answers. Let's start with the denominator first, because you know what? That's the most exciting part of this, right? That's why we're here. 8 times 8, that gets, so I'm going to redraw a fraction here, and just to keep everything like, you know, somewhat the same here. 8 times 8, 64. All right, then 8 times negative 2i, so that gives me negative 16i. 2i times I gives me positive 16i. You see that it always cancels out. And then it's almost like a trick. Minus 4i squared. Now the cool thing here is that this I squared thingy is, we know that I is the square root of negative 1. So what that means is when you have I squared, that just becomes negative 1. That all cancels out. Negative 4 times negative 1 gives us positive 4, and then we have a denominator of 68. All right, so that's our new denominator. It's 68. Now we do the same thing with our top. Make these top here purple. And I'll use, you know what, make them green, just because that's what I already have out. Green, and then 3 times 8 is 24. 3 times negative 2i gives me negative 6i. Negative 5i times 8 equals negative 40i. And then negative 5i times negative 2i gives me positive 10i squared. That again just becomes negative 1. So it flips again. Take your time on these, because it just ends up, you know, really can, that's where a lot of mistakes can be made, and they typically count on you to do that. You can tell, because that's what the answer choices have. It's like what happens with the common mistakes. And then once we're done combining our likes terms here, so 24 minus 10, that gives us 14. Then negative 6i minus 4i gives me negative 46i. It's okay that we have an imaginary number in the numerator. You just don't want it in the denominator. And then that's all over 68. Now, when you have a binomial, one term being subtracted or added to another term with one denominator, you can rewrite that. And a lot of the time the SAT wants us to, and you can see it here by the answer choices that they do want us to, as two problems where the denominators are the same. Or as two fractions where you keep the symbol in between, but then you just rewrite, you essentially write them as their own fractions. And this is the same thing as that. And we realize that once we simplify these by dividing everything by 2, we end up with answer C, which is 7 over 34 minus 23i over 34. So it's more about, can you, because they ask this every time, this is a question to do often and practice a couple times, because this is more about, can you rearrange a problem in the way that the SAT wants you to make it look. There's a bunch of different answers to this, that like forms of the answer that your teacher would probably accept on test day, but on the SAT, they're looking for just one.